Unnumbered case. My name is Jack Sorbat. I'm 34 and my life is order, dated 100 years ago. My profession is archivist. My office is the deepest basement of an old municipal building in Boston. The city council moved out long ago, and the building, officially sealed for renovation, was now my personal dusty crypt. I loved this place. It was dominated by an absolute dense silence, broken only by the hum of the old ventilation systems, which to me was the rhythm of history. I worked among shelves that receded into the darkness like the streets of a dead city. Thousands of folders, brown, gray, yellow, each was a sealed time capsule. My task was to catalog them, to give a name to every scrap of paper. At night I would sometimes hear footsteps upstairs. Quiet, measured, hollow steps on the empty marble. I put it down to the building settling or the wind, but they were too rhythmic for the wind. One night, at exactly 2:07 a.m., when the silence was deepest, I was looking for property deed file number 449B, Caulfield family. It was a case of the century. The decision depended on this ancient deed. I found the right shelf, the right section, and finally the right folder. Heavy, dusty, smelling of mold. I pulled it out. And that's when I discovered something. Under the Caulfield folder lay another. It was stitched not from cardboard or paper, but from dry, coarse, darkened leather. It had no number, no date, no title. It was simply absolute emptiness in a sea of order. My hands trembled. An unnumbered file. That was anarchy. It was the end of my world. Professional curiosity overcame fear. I took the folder. The leather was warm and porous like an old dried sponge. I opened it. There was no text inside, only drawings, children's scribbles done, it seemed, with wax crayons. The images were primitive but terrifyingly specific. They were human figures, but they had no faces. Their limbs were unnaturally long, and they were dragging other, also faceless people toward a vast, black, round pit drawn in the center of the page. There were no captions under the drawings, only one crooked line, like the trace of something that had been dragged across the page. I felt the cold permeate me, not from the basement, but from the impossibility of these drawings. I slammed the folder shut. The leather clapped loudly and the sound dissolved in the dense silence. I tossed it onto the shelf and grabbed the Caulfield file. I was about to run, but then I heard a sound. A quiet, wet chomping sound, like someone was slowly, deliberately licking old, damp leather. The sound was close. It was approaching down the corridor. I hid behind a shelf. I watched as the darkness in the aisle between sections thickened. The sound stopped right at my section. I froze, and then I realized that the sound wasn't coming from the corridor. It was coming from the shelves. It was coming from every folder I hadn't touched. From file number 447, from deed number 22C. Each of the thousands of unopened documents emitted that quiet, wet, chomping sound as if a vast, invisible entity was slowly and greedily licking the dust and starch from their surfaces. This was the taxis, a nameless hunger that fed on oblivion and disorder. I realized the leather folder was the lure. It was a window into this hunger. I felt cold, dry air being drawn from my chest. I abandoned my work so as not to disturb it. I stayed there until dawn. When the first rays of light broke through the tiny basement window, the sound vanished. The shelves once again became dead wood and paper. I didn't tell anyone. How could I? My world, built on inventory, had collapsed. Now I knew that order is a temporary truce with chaos. I went back the next night. I had to. I was the sole keeper of order. I found the leather folder. It was where I had left it, but now it was slightly thicker. I opened it. The main drawing was the same, but this time the drawings were fresher, and on one of the pages I saw a new image. It was a man, huddled in a dark room, surrounded by tall rectangular shadows. The man had no face. Next to the drawing in the corner was a faltering, crooked signature, as if written by a hand that had never held a pencil. J.S. Jack Sorbat. The folder was drawing me. It was taking my identity and turning it into one of its faceless symbols. I realized the case of non-existence is not just chaos. It is a process of erasure. It fed on those who tended it. I burned the sheet. I thought I would destroy the evidence, but the ash vanished as soon as it touched the floor. My obsession became clinical. I started cataloging myself. I bought a notebook and began writing down everything I did and thought. My name, my age, my history. I archived my personality to protect it from the case of non-existence. But when I opened my notebook in the morning, I found that the words on its pages had become pale and indistinct, and some had completely disappeared. And in their place appeared thin, dirty lines that were too similar to the scribbles. I started hearing the footsteps upstairs more often. Now they were heavy, dragging, and they stopped directly above my office. One night, I felt a very cold air descend onto my shoulders. I turned around. Nothing, but on the edge of the desk lay a telephone receiver, an old black device that hadn't worked for 20 years. I picked it up. There was noise in the receiver, not a dial tone, but thousands of rustles, like the shuffling of endless papers. And through that rustling, I heard a voice. A dry, papery whisper, "The Caulfield file is not needed." I froze. That was my project. "You are needed." The voice became disgustingly damp, like the chomping sound. "You are the perfect absence." I hung up the receiver. The case of non-existence didn't just want me, it was rewriting my priority. It wanted me to give up order and admit I was unnumbered. I started creating forgeries. I took hundreds of blank folders and marked them with random numbers. I filled them with blank sheets. I created a false order around myself to deceive the taxis. But every fake folder began to smell of burning. And at night, I heard the chomping sound become furious, hasty, as if it were being sick from my deception. I knew I was running out of time. I decided to give the case of non-existence what it demanded. I returned to the leather folder. I opened it. I took a charcoal pencil. I began to draw. I drew myself. I drew my father, my mother. I drew my old apartment, my books. I drew all my memories. I gave them away in the form of children's scribbles. When I finished, I felt a terrifying emptiness. My head was clean. I forgot my favorite songs, forgot the smells of childhood. I looked at the last sheet. There was my portrait, a faceless figure being dragged toward the black pit. And then I saw the final drawing. It was a box, a wooden rectangular box in which lay my porcelain doll that I had restored in childhood. Horror pierced me. My profession as archivist was not accidental. The archive, the restoration, the taxis, Isolde, all were spaces that craved perfect order and ideal oblivion. I took a knife and cut out this last drawing from the leather. I left only the doll. I knew that if the case of non-existence completed its cycle, it would destroy me. At that moment, the chomping sound became deafening. Thousands of folders emitted a unified, wet, drawn-out moan. The darkness in the corridor thickened and began to move. I bolted for the exit, but the door to my office was jammed. I heard the cracking of wood. The shelves began to collapse. I realized I was buried under tons of papers that I was supposed to catalog. I huddled in the corner, clutching the cut-out piece of leather with the doll drawing to my chest. The shelves crashed down with a roar. Dust and dirt engulfed me. In that moment, as I was buried under the papers, I heard a new terrifying sound. The sound of creation. From the layer of paper, thin, white paper hands were extending. The hands were sharp and they reached for me. They grabbed my clothes. They began to drag me. I felt the paper penetrating my skin, like parchment absorbing my moisture. The voice of the case of non-existence rang in my mind, dry and triumphant. "You are my file." "No, zero," I resisted. I clung to the floor, but the paper hands were stronger. I realized that my only defense was to give it something. I threw the piece of leather with the doll drawing forward. The paper hands stopped. They felt the leather. A quiet, interested, childlike whisper came from the darkness. New. Game. The hands released me. They carried the piece of leather back into the depths of the shelves. I lay in the silence. The crashing stopped. I was saved, but when I stood up, I found that my clothes were sewn to my body. The sharp edges of the paper had pierced my skin like invisible stitches. I got out of the basement and fled. I left Boston. I couldn't work. I forgot how to catalog, but I remembered one thing. Fear. My life was now a search for unnumbered files. I found an archaeologist who was opening old sealed crypts. He didn't know his name either. He was just searching. I realized that we were all part of the same archive. We too were the remnants of those whom the case of non-existence couldn't completely destroy. We were property deeds that had not been found. Together, we returned to old municipal buildings. We looked for leather folders. We burned them, but the folders returned. I realized that burning them was the easy solution. The true victory was to give them a name. We began to catalog the chaos. We numbered every drawing. We gave a name to every faceless person. When I numbered my own portrait, file number 2014, self-oblivion, I remembered my real name. Now we work in the deepest basements of the world. We are the keepers of the borders. We are the last archivists, and every night, when the chomping sound becomes deafening, I know that it is hungry. But I look at the numbered folders that I filled with my past, and I know that I am protected. But sometimes, very rarely, I see very thin, sharp corners of paper extending from the folders and gliding across the floor. They are looking for something that wasn't accounted for. They are waiting for my final order, and I know that the last file I number will be my own.